There we go. Salutations, spooks and spirits and spectres, and welcome to the stream. Welcome today for something completely different from the normal. Today I'll be reading some Edgar Allan Poe stories and poems and all that. Excuse me, phone. Let me pull up chat. My phone's like, I have to do another update. I'm like, you just updated yesterday. And I'm just like, excuse me? What do you mean you have to update again? Again. Yeah. So let's get it. So, I mean, like, I don't really need this because I can see you guys just fine over here. But, you know, I like to have the niceness in case, you know, sometimes there's eye distractions and stuff like that. So, I have my Edgar Allan Poe book right over there. There we go. Chat is properly set up. There we go. Alright. Yeah. It's the wonderful Let's Chatting screen you guys barely get to see, since I usually just jump straight into the game for the most part. But yeah, hello. We're reading Edgar Allan Poe today. I have my book right here. Right here. Lovely. We got Ghost Parade playing on in the background. Hello, Sonico! Welcome! It's been a while. I see your hearts in every book video, but hello. Welcome in. My goodness. They have a long introduction here, don't they? Self-destructive, melancholic, and usually dressed in black, Edgar Allan Poe, 1809 to 1849, was the rock star of American literature in the 1830s and 1840s. He was a rock star! While most writers of his time strove for the appearance of middle-class respectability, Poe was touched by scandal from his earliest day until his death, the circumstances of which remain unresolved. Oh my. Wow. Rufus Griswold. Former friend. Tarnished a reputation. Wow. Well, yeah, we got some, up there it is. Page 68. Page 68 is where our first piece of art is going to be. The nice thing about this book is they have it broken down by poetry and this fictional stories, so that's lovely. I'll have to keep referring back to the table of contents, though, in order to find the stories. But yes, hello everybody. Welcome in. How are we all doing today? How is everybody doing? Sorry, I'm trying to look for something I can use as a bookmarker. What can I use as a bookmarker? That isn't a bookmarker because I got my bookmarker being used as a bookmarker for another book. Yeah. Alright. So, first things first. To establish some stuff, I would like to make sure. I will probably write it. I will type it up. But for right now, when I am reading the stories, I will probably be distracted and not paying too much attention to chat. So please be mindful that my eyes are on the book and probably not the chat. Or the chat. The chat or the chat. I have the spooks and specters on the left, and I have the spirits on the right. And the revenants, I don't know. I don't have any revenants. But how are you guys doing? Happy Halloween. It's spooky day. Everybody's, well, not everybody, but, you know, there's going to be people out there trick-or-treating. For those who are in the respectable areas and their parents feel safe enough letting them go out if, you know, they're not under parental guidance. As for me, I only have 5 pieces of candy left over from my Halloween stash that I purchased. Alright, let's see here. I should be able to go over to my gaming overlay. Can I go over here? Yes, Ghost Parade still going. All right, first things first. Reading Edgar Allan Poe stories, poems. There we go. Now you guys know what we're doing today. You guys know what we're doing today. One moment. Do do do. Ba da ba da ba bow. Ah, that's what I need. All right, we'll copy you. We'll come back over here. Nope, over here. There we go. Here we are. Gremlin Vision. Gremlin Vision's gonna be changed. Because I need to adjust this really quick. All right, so today we are reading. As I've said, we're reading The Raven. The Fall of the House of Usher. To the left. A line to the left. Don't worry, I will shrink it down. I will shrink it down. The Pit and the Pendulum. The Cask of Amontillado. How do you spell that? I want to make sure I spell it properly. I wouldn't want to misspell it, right? Nobody wants misspellings, right? Not a man. Amontillado. Amontillado. What's another one? Oh yeah. The Tell Heart. Everything else is as I see fit. These are the most popular stories. These are the stories I am aware of. These are the this is the stories and stuff I have read, except for the I have not read the Telltale Heart, but I am familiar enough with the Telltale Heart that I'm willing to read it. I know there's other stuff here. This is a very thick book. This book, very thick. How thick? How many pages do we have here of content? We have 1,020 pages of content right here. Right here. Now, is every page readable? Probably not, because, you know, I'm sure there's bits and pieces here that would be rather rude to read. But yes. Yes. Alright, so first things first. I am going to adjust the size of that. There we go. We can see it now. We can see it now. Alright. And what's this? Hello, I. This is my friend, I Am a Disaster. They're debuting a new model reveal today in about 4 hours. In about 4 hours, my friend I is going to be streaming over on their Twitch channel, and they're going to be debuting their brand new look. They're going to be doing a wonderful event for the next 3 days. But, as fun as that is, we're going to be moving on to, where the heck do I have Edgar Allan Poe? Mr. Poe, where are you? Wherefore art thou? There is Mr. Poe. Here's Mr. Poe. I have him right here. Mr. Poe, and guest speaker, well, not guest speaker, but, you know, our wonderful guest for today. I will have you hang out over here. I will adjust you. I just need to get you set up properly. There you go. There you go, Mr. Poe. Alright, and then we're gonna adjust the font. There we go. Hello, Mr. Poe. How are you? I know you're dead. I know you're dead, sir, but how are you doing? How you doing? Welcome. Welcome to the stream, sir. Today we're going to be reading some of your wonderful works of art, your wonderful works of literature. Right here. Here's the list. I will adjust it as necessary. Actually, let's go ahead and let's make it a little bit smaller here. There we go. Because you know what I want to do else? I'm gonna adjust it so. Reading. There we go. Now everybody will know, okay, Blue, which story are we reading? Which one am I reading? Which one am I reading? I'm reading that one. Actually, I have a better idea. Uh-huh. AFK text, guess what? You have a new job. You have a new job. Hee hee hee. Hee hee hee. Now you get to stand out, Mr. AFK text. Reading. There we go. Now it stands out even more. It doesn't just blend in. There we go. There we go. Yeah. Hello, everybody. It's not that I'm not behind. I'm not behind on the reading. Right. Alright. But first things first, we're going to be reading The Raven. I actually, when I typed up this list, I currently wasn't, like, in any particular... I was going to read it from left to right in book, so that way I can just go as I go. There we go. There we go. Alright. So we're going to begin our first reading. I'm going to begin my first reading. Alright, class, listen up. We're reading Edgar Allan Poe today. Open your books to page 68. Page 68. The Raven. So we shall begin. Oh, I forgot to put my note up there. Hold on. I forgot. I have another note I need to put up here. Another note. Another note. Do I have any other text I could borrow? Is there any other text I can borrow? Darn it. Haha. We'll copy that. And bring it over here. Okay, while reading, I will have limited chat interaction. There we go. Alright. While reading, I will have limited chat interaction. There we go. That seems appropriate. Get over here. There we go. Now we shrink it down. There we go. See, it all works. It all works. Everything's here. I have the list of the things I'm reading. I am letting you know which story I am reading. I have a little thing here that says, hey, I am reading. So that means perhaps if you show up while I'm in the middle of reading, you know I'm not going to say hello or anything like that because my eyes are on the book. The eyes will be on the book right here. And the little thing here to let you know, hey, I just showed up. What's going on? You know, because some people just don't understand what the three titles are. I clicked on a video that says reading Edgar Allan Poe stories for Halloween. I don't know what the content's going to be, but I sure am going to ask the streamer. Alright. As I said, class, we are reading Edgar Allan Poe. Please open your books to page 68 and scroll on down to The Raven. There we go. Alright, everybody, ready? We begin. We begin. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, as someone gently rapping at my... While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. 'Tis some visitor, I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here and forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, 'tis some visitor entreating, entrance, at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more. Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. Sir, said I, or madame, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is, I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the darkness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was a whispered word, Lenore? This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the uh-oh. Excuse me. OBS? Hold on. Alright. OBS seems to have stabilized. Sorry. I glanced up. See, this is why I have my phone. I have my phone because it does a little swirly doom of loading. It gets my attention so much faster. And then I notice I like, oh. And I look down and OBS is like, oh. OBS! Stop dropping frames! Stop dropping frames! Yes, thank you. Thank you, YouTube. I am aware. I was paying attention. You be quiet. We shall return to the reading. We are resuming the radioing. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping somewhere louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mane of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon the bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore, though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from nightly shore. Tell me what my lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, through it though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculpture bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul is that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, when utters it is only stock in store, caught from some unhappy master whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore. But the raven still beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated over, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating over she shall press, ah, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim, whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite nepotenth, from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm of Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by hath heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell the soul with sorrow laden, if, within the distant Iden, it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom with the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. By the word of sign of parting bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting, get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit thy bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight over him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. And there we go. That's the raven! Wah! Alright, class, and you must now write a 5-page essay explaining the themes and the meaning behind the raven. Your homework is due by 7 o'clock tonight. If I don't have it in my email by 7 o'clock tonight, then you fail the class forever. Pay off your student loans when you have an F- in American literature. Oh my gosh. Could you imagine hijacking Professor Iscariot's stream and doing this kind of nonsense? Let's go! Hee. Professor Iscariot, being a professor, his background is all about, you know, a classroom. Poetry! Alright, back to the table of contents. Because I don't know any other poems written, like, I have this entire book of poems. They have one page dedicated just to the poetry part of Edgar Allan Poe, and I look at them and I'm just kind of like, huh, he wrote a lot of poetry. He sure did. Lots of poetry right here. I don't know any of them except for the Raven. Because the Raven was just, you know. You know! The City and the Sea. The City and the Sea. The Bells. The Bells? What page is that on? That's on page 78. You guys mind if I read the Bells? We're gonna be reading the Bells. Hold on. Hold on. Impromptu. We're reading the Bells right now. Impromptu. Which one are you? You're not you. Not you. AFK text. We're reading the Bells. That's a poem by Edgar Allan Poe. It's another one of these longer, one of the longer ones. Oh gosh, my throat is being tickled. My throat is being tickled by something fierce. Come here. There we go. You guys are like, is our teacher is the gremlin reading literature? Is they really reading? Are they really drinking a Dr. Pepper this early in the day? I'm like, yes. Yes, I am. That doesn't seem very proper. Yes. But it's what I do. The Bells. We're reading the Bells. Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night. While the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. Hear the mellow wedding bells, golden bells. What a world of happiness their harmony foretells. Through the balmy air of night, how they ring out their delight. From the molten golden notes, all in tune, what a liquid dirty floats to the turtle dove that listens while she gloats on the moon. Oh, from out the sounding cells, what a guff of euphony voluminously wells. How it swells, how it dwells on the future, how it tells of rapture that impels to the swinging and the ringing of the bells, 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 of the bells, 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 to the rhyming and the chiming of the bells. Hear the loud alarum bells, brazen bells, what tell of terror now their turbulency tells. In the startled ear of night, how they scream out their affright. Too much horrified to speak, they can only shriek, shriek out of tune, in a clamorous appealing to the mercy of the fire, in a mad expultation with the deaf and frantic fire, leaping higher, 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 with a desperate desire and a resolute endeavor, now to sit or never, by the side of the pale-faced moons. Oh, the bells, 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 what a tell their terror tales of despair, how they clang and clash and roar, what a horror they outpour on the bosom of the palpitating air, yet the ear it fully knows by the twanging and the clanging, how the danger ebbs and flows, yet the ear distinctly tells in the jingling and the wrangling, how the danger sinks and swells by the sinking or the swelling in the anger of the bells, of the bells, of the bells, 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 in the clamor and the clangor of the bells. Hear the tolling of the bells, iron bells, what a word of solemn thought their monotony compels. In the silence of the night, how we shiver with affright at the melancholy meaning of the tone. For every sound that floats from the rust within their throats is a groan, and the people, the people that dwell up in the steeple all alone, and who, tolling, 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 in that muffled monotone, feel a glory in so rolling of the human heart a stone. They're neither man or woman, they're neither brute or human, they are ghouls, and their king it is who tolls. And he rolls, 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 a-praying from the bells, and his merry bosom swells from the paying of the bells, and he dances and he yells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of ruminant rhyme, to the paying of the bells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme, in a throbbing of the bells, 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 to the sobbing of the bells, keeping time, 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 as he knells, 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 in a happy runic rhyme, to the rolling of the bells, 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 to the tolling of the bells, 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 to the moaning and the groaning of the bells. Wow. That's so fascinating. So fascinating. I was like, I don't understand how, like, I can just get into a rhythm as I'm reading, and I just somehow am able to just keep that rhythm going. For Annie. Oh, for Annie's quite a long. El Dorado. Scenes from Politician, an unpublished drama. Oh my gosh. This one goes on for a while, but it's also the last one. Metzenbergenstein. Oh, I know, it's Metzengerstein. I added the burr. It's just Gerstein. Metzenbergenstein. A Tale of Jerusalem. Lost Breath. I'm just flipping through the pages now, okay. Bonbon. Bonbon. So you can't do that. Like, I know there's people out there who's like, why don't you just get a Nook? Why don't you get an electronic book? You don't get the same feeling when you're flipping through the pages like this, though. MS found in a bottle. The assassin. No, the assignation. Assignation. What is an assignation? The unparalleled adventure of one Hans Prefal. Wait, I saw words in caps. Words in caps. How did it go? To their excellencies von Underduk and Rubadub, President and Vice President of the State's College of Astronomers in the city of Rotterdam. Rotterdam. Sorry, Rotterdam. Sorry. I'm sorry. I was thinking it was Rotterdam. Rottensburg is a city I used for a D&D campaign that I was the DM of. So I got excited, and then I remembered, oh wait, no, it's not Rotterdam, it's Rotterdam. Lionizing. Shadow. A parable. Silence. A fable. Berenice. Morella. King Pest. Mystification. You know, I'm reading these titles and I'm like, my brain is like, you know, I feel like I'm finding book titles for different Elder Scrolls books here. How to write a Blackwood article. Fascinating. Yeah. The Devil in the Belfry. You know, I'm interested in coming back and reading that one. The Man That Was Used Up. Here we go, we found it. I was just flipping through the pages. I found it. Alright. We're no longer reading The Bells. We are now... No, that's Control. We are now currently reading The Fall of the House of Usher. Hello, everybody. Welcome in. We are reading Edgar Allan Poe stories and poems. I have already read The Raven, and I followed that up with by an impromptu reading of The Bells. And now we're moving on to stories. And the first story I ran into upon our list here is The Fall of the House of Usher. I'll begin reading. I'm just going to take a drink here. Delicious. Delicious. The background music is called Ghost Parade. It's Coffee Run. If you'd like to hear more of their works, there's a link to their page in the description. But yes, today, concurrently, right now, I am going to begin reading The Fall of the House of Usher. How long is this story? I remember I read this in English class. And we had you know how you have English books? Wilhelm. Okay, so it's only this long. So basically, for those who are unfamiliar, I don't know. For those, I don't know if every school is like this, but like for me, when we have English class, we have English books, quote unquote English books, which tend to have like a whole variety of different stories and stuff like that. But sometimes, like, some stories may be paraphrased. You're not gonna get like the full, every little last bit. Something like The Raven, you're gonna get the whole thing of The Raven because it's so short. But like Fall of House of Usher here, it is like a good, that starts on page 299. So this is about 15 pages, right? About 15 pages of reading. And my English book, I remember, it was only like maybe 6 pages long, and it wasn't even a full 6 pages of just straight up text like it is here. They would put in, like, I remember distinctly at least 3 pictures were used to break up the text. So yeah. Anyways, The Fall of the House of Usher. Son ca est un luth suspendu. C'est tot qu'un le toucher il résonne de baranga. Whatever that means. Is that French? During the whole of a dull, dark, and soundless day in the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singularly dreary tract of country, and at length found myself, as the shades of the evening drew on, within view of the melancholy house of Usher. I know not how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. I say insufferable, for the feeling was unrelieved by any of that half-pleasurable, because poetic sentiment with which the mind usually receives even the sternest natural images of the desolate or terrible. I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house and the landscape, features of the domain, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant eye-like windows, upon the few rank sedges, and upon a few white trunks of decayed trees, with an utter depression of soul, which I can compare to no earthly sensation more properly than to the after-dream of the reveller upon opium, the bitter lapse into everyday life, the hideous dropping off of the veil. There was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart, an unredeemed dreariness of thought which no goading of the imagination could torture into aught of the sublime. What was it, I paused to think, what was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the house of Usher? It was a mystery all insoluble, nor could I grapple with the shadowy fancies that crowded upon me. As I pondered, I was forced to fall back upon the unsatisfactory conclusion that while beyond doubt there are combinations of very simple natural objects which have the power of thus affecting us, still the analysis of this power lies among considerations beyond our depth. It was possible, I reflected, that a mere different arrangement of the particulars of the scene, of the details of the picture, would be sufficient to modify or perhaps to annihilate its capacity for sorrowful impression. And acting upon this idea, I reined my horse to the precipitous brink of a black and lurid tarn that lay in unruffled luster by the dwelling, and gazed down, but with a shudder even more thrilling than before, upon the remodeled and inverted images of the grey sedge, and the ghastly tree stems, and the vacant and eye-like windows. Nevertheless, in this mansion of gloom, I now propose to myself a sojourn of some weeks. Its proprietor, Roderick Usher, has been one of my boon companions in boyhood, but many years had elapsed since our last meeting. A letter, however, had lately reached me in a distant part of the country, a letter from him, which in its wildly importunate nature had admitted of no other than a personal reply. The MS gave evidence of nervous agitation. The writer spoke of acutely bodily illness, of a mental disorder which oppressed him, and of an earnest desire to see me at his best, and indeed his only personal friend, with a view of attempting by the cheerfulness of my society some alleviation of his malady. It was the manner in which all of this and much more was said, it was the apparent heart that went within his request, which allowed me no room for hesitation, and accordingly obeyed forthwith what I still considered a very singular summons. Although as boys we had been even intimate associates, yet I really knew little of my friend. His reserve had been always excessive and habitual. I was aware, however, that his very ancient family had been noted, time out of mind, for a peculiar sensibility of temperament, displaying itself through long ages in many works of exalted art, and manifested of late in repeated deeds of munificent yet unobtrusive charity, as well as in a passionate devotion to the intricacies, perhaps even more to the orthodox and easily recognizable beauties of musical science. I'd learned, too, the very remarkable fact that the stem of the Usher race, all time honored as it was, had put forth, at no period, any enduring branch. In other words, that the entire family lay in a direct line of descent, and had always, with very trifling and very temporary variations, so lain. It was this deficiency I considered, while running over in thought the perfect keeping of the character of the premises with the accredited character of the people, and while speculating upon the possible influence which the one, in the long lapse of centuries, might have exercised upon the other. It was this deficiency, perhaps, of collateral issue, and the conquest undeviating transmission from sire to son of the patrimony with the name, which had at length so identified the two as to merge the original title of the estate in the quaint and equivocal appellation of the House of Usher, an appellation which seemed to include in the minds of the peasantry who used it both the family and the family mansion. I have said that the sole effect of my somewhat childish experiment, that of looking down with the tarn, had been to deepen the first singular impression. There can be no doubt that the consciousness of the rapid increase of my superstition, for why should I not so term it, served mainly to accelerate the increase itself. Such I have long known, in the paradoxical law of all sentiments having terror as a basis, and it might have been for this reason only that when I again uplifted my eyes to the house itself, from its image in the pool, there grew in my mind a strange fancy, a fancy so ridiculous indeed that I but mention it to show the vivid force of the sensations which oppressed me. I had so worked upon my imagination as really to believe that about the whole mansion and domain that hung an atmosphere peculiar to themselves and their immediate vicinity, an atmosphere which had no affinity with the air of heaven, but which had reeked up from the decayed trees and the gray wall and the silent tarn. A pestilent and mystic vapor, dull, sluggish, faintly discernible, and leaden-hued. Shaking off from my spirit what must have been a dream, I scanned more narrowly the real aspect of the building. Its principal feature seemed to be that of an excessive antiquity. The discoloration of ages had been great. Minute fungi overspread the whole exterior, hanging in a fine tangled webwork from the eaves. Yet all this was apart from any extraordinary dilapidation. No portion of the masonry had fallen, and there appeared to be a wild inconsistency between its still perfect adaptation of parts and the crumbling condition of the individual stones. In this there was much that reminded me of the specious totality of old woodwork, which has rotted for long years in some neglected vault, with no disturbance from the breath of the external air. Beyond this indication of extensive decay, however, the fabric gave little token of instability. Perhaps the eye of a scrutinizing observer might have discovered a barely perceptible fissure, which, extending from the roof of the building in front, made its way down the wall in a zigzag direction, until it became lost in the sullen waters of the tarn. Drink time. Yum. Noticing these things, I rode over a short causeway to the house. A servant in waiting took my horse, and I entered the Gothic archway of the hall. A valet of stealthy step hence conducted me in silence through many dark and intricate passages in my progress to the studio of his master. Much that I encountered on the way contributed, I know not how, to heighten the vague sentiments of which I have already spoken. While the objects around me, while the carvings of the ceilings and the somber tapestries of the walls, the ebon blackness of the floors, and the phantasmagoric armorial trophies which rattled as I strode, were but matters to which, or to such as which, I had been accustomed from my infancy. While I hesitated not to acknowledge how familiar was all this, I still wondered to find how unfamiliar were the fancies which ordinary images were stirring up. Hi, James. Welcome in. How's it going? Currently reading The House of Usher. On one of the staircases, I met the physician of the family. His countenance, I thought, wore a mingled expression of low cunning and perplexity. He accosted me with trepidation and passed on. The valet now threw open a door and ushered me into the presence of his master. The room in which I found myself was very large and lofty. The windows were long, narrow, and pointed, and at so vast a distance from the black oaken floor as to be altogether inaccessible from within. Feeble gleams of encrimsoned light made their way through the trellised panes, and served to render sufficiently distinct the more prominent objects around. The eye, however, struggled in vain to reach the remoter angles of the chamber, or the recess of the vaulted and fretted ceiling. Dark draperies hung upon the walls. The general furniture was profuse, comfortless, antique, and tattered. Many books and musical instruments lay scattered about, but failed to give any vitality to the scene. I felt that I breathed an atmosphere of sorrow. An air of stern, deep, and irredeemable gloom hung over and pervaded all. Upon my entrance, Usher arose from a sofa on which he had been lying at full length, and greeted me with a vivacious warmth which had much in it, I at first thought, and of an overdone cordiality, of the constrained effort of the ennuyé man of the world. A glance, however, at his countenance convinced me of his perfect sincerity. We sat down, and for some moments, while he spoke not, I gazed upon him with a feeling of half of pity, half of awe. Surely a man had never before so terribly altered in so brief a period as had Roderick Usher. It was with difficulty that I could bring myself to admit the identity of the wan being before me with the companion of my early boyhood. Yet the character on his face had been at all times remarkable. A cadaverousness of complexion, an eye large, liquid, and luminous beyond comparison, lips somewhat thin and very pallid, but of a surpassingly beautiful curve, a nose of a delicate Hebrew model, but with the breadth of nostril unusual in similar formations, a finely molded chin, speaking in its want of prominence, of a want of moral energy, hair of a more than web-like softness and tenuity. These features, with an inordinate expansion above the region of the temple, made up altogether of a continent not easily to be forgotten. And now, in the mere exaggeration of the prevailing character of these features, and of the expression they were wont to convey, lay so much of change that I doubted to whom I spoke. The now ghastly pallor of the skin, and the now miraculous luster of the eye, above all things startled and even awed me. The silken hair, too, had been suffered to grow all unheeded, and as, in its wild gossamer texture, it floated rather than fell about the face, I could not, even with effort, connect its abrasque expression with any idea of simple humanity. My goodness gracious, my arm. This is a heavy book. It's starting to weigh down on my arm. Oh my gosh. In the manner of my friend, I was at once struck with an incoherence, an inconsistency, and I soon found this to arise from a series of feeble and futile struggles to overcome an habitual trepidancy, an excessive nervous agitation. For something of this nature I had indeed been prepared, no less by his letter than by reminiscences of certain boyish traits, and by conclusions deduced from his peculiar physical conformation and temperament. His action was alternately vivacious and sullen. His voice varied rapidly from tremulous indecision, when the animal spirits seemed utterly in abeyance, to that species of energetic concision, that abrupt, weighty, unhurried, and hollow-sounding enunciation, that leaden self-balance, and perfectly modulated guttural utterance, which may be observed in the lost drunkard, or the irreclaimable eater of opium, during the periods of his most intense excitement. It was thus that he spoke of the object of my visit, of his earnest desire to see me, and of the solace he expected me to afford him. He entered at some length into what he conceived to be the nature of his malady. It was, he said, a constitutional and a family evil, and one for which he despaired to find a remedy. A mere nervous affection, he immediately added, which would undoubtedly soon pass off. It displayed itself in a host of unnatural sensations. Some of these, as he detailed then, interested and bewildered me, although perhaps the terms and the generalness of the senses, and the general manner of the narration had their weight. He suffered much from a morbid acuteness of the senses. A most insipid food was alone endurable. He could wear only garments of certain texture. The odors of all flowers were oppressive. His eyes were tormented by even a faint light, and there were but peculiar sounds, and these from stringed instruments which did not inspire him with horror. So in terminology, he can only eat one food. Everything else tastes horrible or off-putting. The faintest of lights. He's like, bright light, bright light, bright light, it hurts my eyes. Except for certain string instruments, everything, most sounds just kind of kill his ears. And any sort of like clothing or whatever he feels is, it just tingles or whatever. I don't know. Anyways, I'm supposed to just be reading, right? To an anomalous species of terror I found him, a bonded slave. I shall perish, said he. I must perish in this deplorable folly. Thus, and not otherwise, shall I be lost. I dread the events of the future, not in themselves, but in their results. I shudder at the thought of any, even the most trivial incident, which may operate upon this intolerable agitation of soul. I have indeed no abhorrence of danger, except in its absolute effect, in terror. In this unnerved, in this pitiable condition, I feel that the period will sooner or later arrive when I must abandon life and reason together, in some struggle with the grim phantasm, fear. I learned, moreover, at intervals and through broken and equivocal hints, another singular feature of his mental condition. He was enchained by certain superstitious impressions in regard to the dwelling which he tenanted, and whence, for many years, he had never ventured forth, in regard to an influence whose superstitious force was conveyed in terms too shadowy here to be restated. An influence which some peculiarities in the mere form and substance of his family mansion had, by dint of long sufferance, he said, obtained over his spirit, an effect which the physique of the grey walls and turrets, and of the dim tarn into which they all looked down, had at length brought about upon the morale of his existence. Hold on, I'm adjusting. Adjusting posture. He admitted, however, although with hesitation, that much of the peculiar gloom which thus afflicted him could be traced to a more natural and far more palpable origin, to the severe and long-continued illness, indeed to the evidently approaching dissolution, of a tenderly beloved sister, his sole companion for long years, his last and only relative on earth. Her decease, he said, with a bitterness which I cannot forget, would leave him the hopeless and the frail, the last of the ancient race of the Ushers. While he spoke, the Lady Madeline, for so was she called, passed slowly through a remote portion of the apartment, and, without having noticed my presence, disappeared. I regarded her with an utter astonishment, not mingled with dread, and yet I found it impossible to account for such feelings. A sensation of stupor oppressed me, as my eyes followed her retreating steps. When a door at length closed upon her, my glance sought instinctively and eagerly the countenance of the brother. But he had buried his face in his hands, and I could only perceive that a far more than ordinary wanness had overspread the emaciated fingers, through which trickled many passionate tears. The disease of the Lady Madeline had long baffled the skill of her physicians. A settled apathy, a gradual wasting away of the person, and frequent, although transient, affections of a partially cataleptical character were the usual diagnosis. Hitherto she had steadily borne up against the pressure of her malady, and had not betaken herself finally to bed, but, on the closing in the evening of my arrival at the house, she succumbed, as her brother told me at the night of inexpressible agitation, to the prostrating power of the destroyer, and I learned that the glimpse I had obtained of her person would thus probably be the last I should obtain, that the lady, at least while living, would be seen by me no more. One moment. I'm starting to overheat, so I'm going to remove my jacket. Hello, jacket. You have done your good job of keeping me warm during these early hours of the day, but the sun is now out and the temperature goes up. And now we continue. Aya! Aya! For several days ensuing, her name was unmentioned by either Usher or myself, and during this period I was busied in earnest endeavors to alleviate the melancholy of my friend. We painted and read together, or I listened, as if in a dream, to the wild improvisations of his speaking guitar, and thus, as a closer and still closer intimacy admitted me more unreservedly into the recesses of his spirit, the more bitterly did I perceive the futility of all attempt at cheering a mind from which darkness, as if an inherent positive quality, poured forth upon all objects of the moral and physical universe, in which unceasing radiation of gloom. In one unceasing radiation of gloom, I shall ever bear about me a memory of the many solemn hours I thus spent alone with the master of the house of Usher. Yet I should fail in any attempt to convey an idea of the exact character of the studies, or of the occupations in which he involved me, or led me the way. An excited and highly distempered ideality threw a sulphurous luster over all. His long improvised dirges will ring forever in my ears. Among other things, I hold painfully in mind a certain singular perversion and amplification of the wild air of the last waltz of von Weber. Hello, just a name. Welcome in. How's it going? How are you doing? We're in the middle of the fall of the House of Usher. But hello. Happy Halloween! Happy Halloween! From the paintings over which his elaborate fancy brooded, and which grew, touch by touch, into vagueness at which I shuddered the more thrillingly, because I shuddered, knowing not why, from these paintings, vivid as their images now are before me, I would in vain endeavor to adduce more than a small portion which would lie within the compass of merely written words. This is the perfect for tonight. Yes. I've already gone through The Raven, and then I did an impromptu reading of The Bells. And now we're here. By the utter simplicity, by the nakedness of his designs, he arrested and overawed attention. If ever mortal painted an idea, that mortal is Roderick Usher. For me, at least, in the circumstances then surrounding me, there arose out of the pure abstractions which the hypochondriac contrived to throw upon his canvas an intensity of intolerable awe, no shadow of which felt I ever yet in the contemplation of the certainly glowing yet too concrete reveries of Fuseli. Not chatting either? It's 'cause sick. Well, I hope you'll get better. I wish you your good health. Just a name, I wish you good health. Yes. Get well soon. One of the phantasmagorical conceptions of my friend, partaking not so rigidly of the spirit of abstraction, may be shadowed forth, although feebly in words. A small picture presented the interior of an immensely long and rectangular vault or tunnel, with low walls, smooth, white, and without interruption or device. Certain accessory points of the design served well to convey the idea that this excavation lay at the exceedingly depth below the surface of the earth. No outlet was observed in any portion of its vast extent, and no torch or other artificial source of light was discernible. Yet a flood of intense rays rolled throughout, and bathed the whole in a ghastly and inappropriate splendor. Yay. I have just spoken of that morbid condition of the auditory nerve which rendered all music intolerable to the sufferer, with the exception of certain effects of stringed instruments. It was, perhaps, the narrow limits to which he thus confined himself upon the guitar, which gave birth, in great measure, to the fantastic character of his performances. But the fervid facility of his impromptus could not be so accounted for. They must have been, and were, in the notes, as well as in the words of his wild fantasias, for he not unfrequently accompanied himself with rhymed verbal improvisations. The result of that intense mental collectedness and concentration to which I have previously alluded, as observable only in particular moments of the highest artificial excitement. The words of one of these rhapsodies I have easily remembered. I was perhaps the more forcibly impressed with it, as he gave it, because in the under or mystic current of its meaning, I fancied that I perceived, and for the first time, a full consciousness on the part of Usher, of the tottering of his lofty reason upon her throne. The verses, which were entitled The Haunted Palace, ran very nearly, if not accurately, thus. Beverage. In the greenest of our valleys, by good angels tenanted, once a fair and stately palace, radiant palace, reared its head. In the monarch of thought's dominion, I stood there. Never seraph spread a pinion over fabric half so fair. Banners yellow, glorious golden, on its roof did float and flow. All this, was in the olden time long ago. And every gentle air that dallied in that sweet day, although the ramparts plumed and pallid, a winged odor went away. Wanderers in that happy valley through two luminous windows saw spirits moving musically to a lure's well-tuned law. Round about a throne were sitting Porphyrogene. One moment. Pronunciation. Porphyrogene. In state his glory wall befitting, the ruler of the realm was seen. I should prepare a dictionary. Lots of fancy words. Yes, I mean, this was back in the day. And all with pearl and ruby glowing was the fair palace door, through which some flowing, and sparkling evermore, a troop of echoes whose sweet duty was but to sing, in voices of surpassing beauty, the wit and wisdom of their king. But evil things in robes of sorrow assailed the monarch's high estate. Ah, let us mourn, for never morrow shall dawn upon him desolate. And round about his home the glory, the blushed and bloomed, is but a dim remembered story of the old time entombed. And travelers now within the valley, through the red-litten window see vast forms that move fantastically to a discordant melody, while like a rapid ghastly river, through the pale door a hideous throng rushed out forever, and laugh, but smile no more. I see. I will remember that suggestions arising from this ballad led us to a train of thought wherein there became manifest an opinion of Usher's which I mention not so much on account of its novelty, for other men have thus thought. Watson, Dr. Percival, and especially Bishop of Landolf. We have a bit of a thingy here. We have a thingy here. It's pretty much saying, hey, by the way, we just want to let you know, we have little appendix notes here. Appendix notes. As on account of the pertinacity with which he maintained it. So when did the Usher took up rapping? This was music. Rapping was born from Edgar Allan Poe. The House of Usher was the birthplace. You thought it was the 90s? No, we've been rapping since the 1830s. This opinion, in its general form, was that of the sentience of all vegetable things. But in his disordered fancy, the idea had assumed a more daring character and trespassed, under certain conditions, upon the kingdom of inorganization. I lack words to express the full extent or the earnest abandon of his persuasion. The belief, however, was connected, as I have previously hinted, with the grey stones of the home of his forefathers. The conditions of the sentience had been there, he reimagined, fulfilled in the method of collocation of these stones, and in the order of their arrangement, as well as in that of the many fungi which overspread them, and of the decayed trees which stood around. Above all, in the long undisturbed endurance of this arrangement, and in its reduplication in the still waters of the Tarn. Its evidence, the evidence of the sentience, was to be seen, he said, and I here started as he spoke, in the gradual yet certain condensation of an atmosphere of their own about the waters and the walls. The result was discoverable, he added, in that silent yet importunate and terrible influence which for centuries had molded the destinies of his family, and which made him what I saw him, what he was. Such opinions need no comment, and I will make none. Our books, the books which for years had formed no small portion of the mental existence of the invalid, were, as might he supposed, in strict keeping with this character of phantasm. We pored together over such works as the Vervent et Chartreuse of Grisset, man, these names, the Belphegor of Machiavelli, the Heaven and Hell of Swedenborg, the Subterranean Voyage of Nicholas Klein by Holberg, the Chiromancy of Robert Flood, of Jean de Indigny, and of de la Chambre. French! French! The Journey into the Blue Distance of Tieck, and the City of the Sun of Campanella. One favorite volume was a small octavo edition of the Directorium Inquisitorium by the Dominican Aymeric de Guerone. I don't know if I said that right. And there were passages in Pomponius Mela about the old African satires and oegibians. How do you say the O-E word? You know, the one where the O and the, where capital O and E are like morphed together into one letter? Oegians. Over which Usher would sit dreaming for hours. His chief delight, however, was found in the perusal of an exceedingly rare and curious book in Quarto Gothic, a manual of a forgotten church, the Vigile Mortuorum Secundum Corum Ecclesiae Magantine. I am casting magic spells. You can just read these words and you're casting a spell. I could not help thinking of the wild ritual of this work, and of its probable influence upon the hypochondriac. Hypochondriac. I know the word hypochondriac, but my brain is like temporarily forgetting what it means. What is hypochondriac? Google. Yeah, thank you. Also known as an illness anxiety disorder, a mental condition characterized by excessive and persistent worry. Oh, that's why it sounds so... I've been called a hypochondriac a lot. No wonder it sounds so familiar. I cannot help thinking of the wild ritual of this work, of its probable influence upon the hypochondriac, when one evening, having informed me abruptly that the Lady Madeline was no more, he stated his intention of preserving her corpse for a fortnight, previously to its final interment, in one of the numerous vaults within the main hall walls of the building. The worldly reason, however, assigned for this singular proceeding was one which I did not feel at liberty to dispute. The brother had been led to his to his resolution, so he told me, by consideration of the usual character of the malady of the deceased, of certain obtrusive and eager inquiries on the part of her medical men, and of the remote and exposed situation of the burial ground of the family. I will not deny that when I called to mind the sinister countenance of the person whom I met upon the staircase on the day of my arrival at the house, I had no desire to oppose what I regarded as, at best, but a harmless and by no means an unnatural precaution. At the request of Usher, I personally aided him in the arrangements for the temporary entombment. The body having been encoffined, we two alone bore it to its rest. The vault in which we placed it, and which had been so long unopened that our torches, half smothered in its oppressive atmosphere, gave us little opportunity for investigation, was small, damp, and entirely without means of admission for light, lying at great depth immediately beneath that portion of the building in which was my own sleeping apartment. It had been used, apparently, in remote feudal times, for the worst purposes of a donjon keep. Donjon. You think they mean dungeon? Did we respell donjon to dungeon? Donjon keep. And in later days, as a place of deposit for powder, or some other highly combustible substance, as a portion of its floor and the whole interior of a long archway through which we reached it were carefully sheathed with copper. The door of massive iron had been also similarly protected. Its immense weight caused an unusually sharp grating sound as it moved upon its hinges. Like that noise kind of thing. Having deposited our mournful burden upon trestles within this region of horror, we partially turned aside the yet unscrewed lid of the coffin, and looked upon the face of the tenant. A striking similitude between the brother and sister now first arrested my attention, and Usher, divining perhaps my thoughts, murmured out some few words from which I learned that the deceased and himself had been twins, and that sympathies of a scarcely intelligible nature had always existed between them. Our glances, however, rested not long upon the dead, for we could not regard her unawed. The disease which had thus entombed the lady in the maturity of youth had left, as usual in all maladies of a strictly cataleptical character, the mockery of a faint blush upon the bosom and the face, and that suspiciously lingering smile upon the lip which is so terrible in death. We replaced and screwed down the lid, and, having secured the door of iron, made our way with toil into the scarcely less gloomy apartments of the upper portion of the house. And now, some days of bitter grief have elapsed. An observable change came over the features of the mental disorder of my friend. His ordinary manner had vanished. His ordinary occupations were neglected or forgotten. He roamed from chamber to chamber with hurried, unequal, and objectless step. The pallor of his countenance had assumed, if possible, a more ghastly hue. But the luminousness of his eye had utterly gone out, and once occasional huskiness of his tone was heard no more, and a tremulous quaver, as if of extreme terror, habitually characterized his utterances. There were times, indeed, when I thought his unceasingly agitated mind was laboring with some oppressive secret, to divulge which he struggled for the necessary courage. At times, again, I was obliged to resolve all into the mere inexplicable vagaries of madness, for I beheld him gazing upon vacancy for long hours, in an attitude of the profoundest attention, as if listening to some imaginary sound. It was no wonder that his condition terrified, that it infected me. I felt creeping upon me, by slow yet certain degrees, the wild influences of his own fantastic yet impressive superstitions. It was especially upon retiring to bed late in the night of the 7th or 8th day after the placing of the Lady Madeline into the dungeon that I experienced the full power of such feelings. Sleep came not near my couch, while the hours waned and waned away. I struggled to reason off the nervousness which I had dominion over me. I endeavored to believe that much, if not all, of what I felt was due to the bewildering influence of the gloomy furniture of the room, of the dark and tattered draperies, which, tortured into motion by the breath of a rising tempest, swayed fitfully to and fro upon the walls, and rustled uneasily about the decorations of the bed. But my efforts were fruitless. An irrepressible tremor gradually pervaded my frame, and, at length, there sat upon my very heart an incubus of utterly causeless alarm. Shaking this off with a gasp and a struggle, I uplifted myself upon the pillows, and peering earnestly within the intense darkness of the chamber, hearkened, I know not why, except that an instinctive spirit prompted me, to certain low and indefinite sounds which came, through the pauses of the storm, at long intervals, I knew not whence. Overpowered by an intense sentiment of horror, unaccountable yet unendurable, I threw on my clothes with haste, for I felt that I should sleep no more during the night, and endeavored to arouse myself from the pitiable condition into which I had fallen by pacing rapidly to and fro through the apartment. I had taken but few turns in this manner when a light step on the adjoining staircase arrested my attention. I presently recognized it as that of Usher. In an instant afterward, he rapped, with a gentle touch, at my door, and entered, bearing a lamp. His countenance was, as usual, cadaverously wan. But, moreover, there was a species of mad hilarity in his eyes, as evidently restrained hysteria in his whole demeanor. His air appalled me, but anything was preferable to the solitude which I had so long endured, and I even welcomed his presence as a relief. "And you have not seen it," he said abruptly, after having stared about him for some moments in silence. "You have not seen it? But stay, you shall." Thus speaking, and having carefully shaded his lamp, he hurried to one of the casements and threw it freely open to the storm. The impetuous fury of the entering gust nearly lifted us from our feet. It was indeed a tempestuous yet sternly beautiful night, and one wildly singular in its terror and its beauty. A whirlwind had apparently collected its force in our vicinity, for there were frequent and violent alterations in the direction of the wind, and the exceedingly density of the clouds, which hung so low as to press upon the turrets of the house, did not prevent our perceiving the lifelike velocity with which they flew careering from all points against each other, without passing away into the distance. "Hello there, Kathy." "Hello there, Kathy. Welcome in. How's it going? We are currently in the middle of the fall of the House of Usher. Welcome." Where was I? Without passing away into the distance. I say that even their exceeding density did not prevent our perceiving this, yet we had no glimpse of the moon or stars, nor was there any flashing forth of the lightning, but the under surfaces of the huge masses of agitated vapor, as well as all terrestrial objects immediately around us, were glowing in the unnatural light of a faintly luminous and distinctively visible gaseous exhalation, which hung about and enshrouded the mansion. You shall not behold this," said I, shudderingly, to Usher as I led him, with a gentle violence, from the window to a seat. "These appearances, which bewilder you, are merely electrical phenomena not uncommon, or it may be that they have their ghastly origin in the rank miasma of the tarn. Let us close this casement. The air is chilling and dangerous to your frame. Here is one of your favorite romances. I will read, and you shall listen, and so we will pass away this terrible night together. The antique volume which I had taken up was the Madrist of Sir Launcelot Canning, but I called it a favourite of Usher's more in sad jest than in earnest. For in truth there is little in its uncouth and unimaginary prolixity which could have had interest for the lofty and spiritual ideality of my friend. It was, however, the only book immediately at hand, and I indulged a vague hope that the excitement which now agitated the hypochondriac might find relief. For the history of mental disorder is full of similar anomalies. Even in the extremeness of the folly which I should read, could I have judged indeed by the wild, overstained air of vivacity with which he hearkened, or apparently hearkened, to the words of the tale, I might well have congratulated myself upon the success of my design. I had arrived at that well-known portion of the story where Ethelred, the hero of the tryst, having sought in vain for peaceably admission into the dwelling of the hermit, proceeds to make good an entrance by force. Here, it will be remembered, the words of the narrative ran thus. And Ethelred, who by the nature of a doughty heart, and who was now mighty withal, on account of the powerfulness of the wine which he had drunken, waited no longer to hold parley with the hermit, who, in sooth, was an obstinate and maliceful turn, but, feeling the rain upon his shoulders, and fearing the rising of the tempest, uplifted his mace outright, and, with blows, made quickly room in the plankings of the door for his gauntleted hand, and now, pulling therewith sturdily, he so cracked and ripped and tore all asunder, that the noise of the dry and hollow-sounding wood alarumed and reverberated throughout the forest. At the termination of this sentence I started, and for a moment paused. For it appeared to me, although I at once concluded that my excited fancy had deceived me, it appeared to me that from some very remote portion of the mansion there came indistinctly to my ears what might have been, in its exact similarity of character, the echo, but a stifled and dull one certainly, of the very cracking and ripping sound which Sir Launcelot had so particularly described. It was, beyond doubt, the coincidence alone which had arrested my attention, for amid the rattling of the sashes of the casements and the ordinary commingled noises of the still increasingly storm, the sound in itself had nothing, surely, which should have interested or disturbed me. I continued the story. But the good champion Ethelred, now entering within the door, was sore enraged and amazed to perceive no signal of the maliceful hermit, but in the stead thereof a dragon of a scaly and prodigious demeanour, and of a fiery tongue, which sate in guard before a palace of gold with a floor of silver, and upon a wall there hung a shield of shining brass with this legend enwritten: Who entreateth herein a conqueror hath been, who slayeth the dragon the shield he shall win. And Ethelred uplifted his mace and struck upon the head of the dragon, which fell before him and gave up his pesty breath, with a shriek so horrid and harsh, and withal so piercing, that Ethelred had fain to close his ears with his hands against the dreadful noise of it, and like whereof was never before heard. And here again I paused, abruptly, and now with a feeling of wild amazement, for there could be no doubt whatever that, in this instance, I did actually hear, although from what direction it proceeded I found impossible to say, a low and apparently distant, but harsh, protracted, and most unusual screaming or grating sound, the exact counterpart of what my fancy had already conjured up for the dragon's unnatural shriek had described by the romancer. Oppressed, as I certainly was upon the occurrence of the second and most extraordinary coincidence, by 1,000 conflicting sensations in which wonder and extreme terror were predominant, I still retained sufficient presence of mind to avoid exciting, by any observation, the sensitive nervousness of my companion. I was by no means certain that he had noticed the sounds in question, although assuredly a strange alteration had, during the last few minutes, taken place in his demeanor. From a position affronting my own, he had gradually brought round his chair, so as to sit with his face to the door of the chamber, and thus I could but partially perceive his features, although I saw that his lips trembled as if he were murmuring inaudibly. His head had dropped upon his breast, yet I knew that he was not asleep, from the wide and rigid opening of the eye as I caught a glance of it in profile. The motion of his body, too, was at a variance with this idea, for he rocked from side to side with a gentle, yet constant and uniform sway. Having rapidly taken notice of all this, I resumed the narrative of Sir Launcelot, which thus proceeded. And now the champion, having escaped from the terrible fury of the dragon, bethinking himself of the brazen shield, and of the breaking up of the enchantment upon which it was upon it, removed the carcass from out of the way before him, and approached valorously over the silver pavement of the castle to where the shield was upon the wall, which in sooth tarried not for his full coming, but fell down at his feet upon the silver floor, with a mighty, great, and terrible ringing sound. No sooner had those syllables passed my lips than, as if a shield of brass had indeed, at the moment, fallen heavily upon a floor of silver, I became aware of a distant, hollow, metallic, and clangorous yet apparently muffled reverberation. Completely unnerved, I leaped to my feet, but the measured rocking movements of Usher was undisturbed. I rushed to the chair in which he sat. His eyes were bent fixedly before him, and throughout his whole countenance there reigned a stony rigidity. But, as I placed my hand upon his shoulder, there came a strong shudder over his whole person. A sickly smile quivered about his lips, and I saw that he spoke in a low, hurried, and gibbering murmur, as if unconscious of my presence. Bending closely over him, I at length drank in the hideous imports of his words. Not hear it? Yes, I hear it. I have heard it. Long, many minutes, many hours, many days, I have heard it. Yet I dared not. Oh, pity me, miserable wretch that I am. I dared not speak. We have put her living in the tomb. Said I not that my senses were acute? I now tell you that I heard her first feeble movements in the hollow coffin. I heard them many days ago, yet I dared not speak. And now, tonight, Ethelred, ha! The breaking of the hermit's door, then the death cry of the dragon, and the clangor of the shield, say rather the rending of her coffin, and the grating of the iron hinges of her prison, and her struggles within the coppered archway of the vault. Of whither shall I fly? Will she not be here anon? Is she not hurrying up to upbraid me from my haste? Have I not heard her footsteps upon the stair? Do I not distinguish that heavy and horrible beating of her heart? Madman! Here he sprang furiously to his feet and shrieked out his syllables as if in the effort he were giving up his soul. Madman, I tell you that she now stands without that door! As if, in the superhuman energy of his utterance, there had been found the potency of a spell. The huge antique panels to which the speaker appointed threw slowly back upon the instant their ponderous and ebony jaws. It was the work of the rushing gust, but then, without those doors, there did stand the lofty and enshrouded figure of Lady Madeline of Usher. There was blood upon her white robes, and the evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her emaciated frame. For a moment she remained trembling and reeling to and fro upon the threshold, then, with a low moaning cry, fell heavily inward upon the person of her brother, and in her violent and now final death agonies bore him to the floor a corpse and a victim to the terrors he had anticipated. From that chamber and from that mansion I fled aghast. The storm was still abroad in all its wrath as I found myself crossing the old causeway. Suddenly there shot along a path a wild light, and I turned to see whence a gleam so unusual could have issued. For the vast house and its shadows were alone behind me. The radiance was that of the full setting and blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through that once barely discernible fissure, of which I have before spoken as extending from the roof of the building in a zigzag direction to the base. While I gazed, this fissure rapidly widened. There came a fierce breath of the whirlwind. An entire orb of the satellite burst at once upon my sight. My brain reeled as I saw the mighty walls rushing asunder. There was a long, tumultuous shouting sound like the voice of 1,000 waters. And the deep and dark tarn at my feet closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher. The end. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh my god. I need to give my arm a break. Oh my goodness, arm. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh my god. Sorry, I need to flex my arm a bit here because I've just been holding this book. Woo! Woo! Love that story. Ah, nice. I think I read this. I think my first reading of this was, as I mentioned, I think in my English book, when I think it was, which year was it? I think it was sophomore. It was either my sophomore year or it was my junior year in high school. That was when I read the Fall of House of Usher. It was like 6-7 pages long. They cut down the story that much, and they also had like 3 or so odd images. I distinctly remember the final image for the story they had was an artist depiction of Usher and Madeline, Roderick and Madeline. Madeline reaching out, all corpse-like and skeletal and stuff, reaching out for the horrified Roderick, and he's just like, "Urgh!" And she's like, "Rah!" That was like the final image I remember. Oh boy, oh man, my arm. Alright, give me a moment. I'm gonna get me some water. But yes, hello. Welcome in. Saw the name Poe and had to listen. Well, welcome in. How are you doing? Let me just get some water here. From my water jug here. Come here and water. Give me something for which to quench my parched throat. And there we go. The spout tends to leak water, so I try to tap it, but it leaks anyway, whatever. Hello, Philip. Welcome in. Happy Halloween. Hello. We just finished reading The Fall of the House of Usher. Wow. It's already been an hour and a half. Wow, that's crazy. So crazy. Yeah. Alright. There we go. Delicious water. Delicious water. Soothing the throat. Alright, what's next? What's the next? I have the Pit and Pendulum there, but which one comes next? The Pit and the Pendulum. The Pit and the Pendulum is page 443. 443. William Williamson. Why the little Frenchman wears his hand in a sling. The man of the crowd. The murderers in the Rue Morgue. Most of these titles I'm familiar with, mostly because of Ray Bradbury. in the book, his book, The Martian Chronicles. One of the stories in that one of the short stories is called Usher 2. And it's about a guy who, the Mask of the Red Death. There's the Pit and the Pendulum. How long is this one? $443 to $454. So that's like what, 9 pages? 9 pages. I forgot. My brain, the way my brain summarizes, the plot, the ending of The Pit and the Pendulum has always just been, nobody suspects the Spanish Inquisition, but it's actually not the Spanish Inquisition. All right. We are concurrently reading The Pit and the Pendulum. Woo! This was another one. This was another story from an English book. I'm pretty sure this was the one in my sophomore year. I actually read this one on my own. We never actually read this in English class, but I was flipping through my English book, and I saw this story. So during one of my more boring classes, and by boring classes, I mean, it was pretty much a free study kind of class. Like, I had already done all my work. It was just like the teacher's like, okay, class. If you have any additional work you need to catch up on, go for it. Everybody else, this is just free study period. So I just opened up my English book, and I was like, what can I read in my English book? The Pit and the Pendulum? Sure, why not? So I'm reading The Pit and the Pendulum. I'm going to just take another drink here. Delicious. The Pit and the Pendulum. We have some, I think this is French. Impia totorum longos hic turba furores sanguinis innocui non satiata eluit suspite nunc patria fracto nunc veneris antra mors ubi dera fruit vita solusque patent. Quatrain composed for the gates of a market to be erected upon the site of a Jacobin clubhouse at Paris. So yes, it is French. It is French, I guess. Look, I can speak French. I can read French. I don't know what it means, but I said it. You just insulted so many people, Blue, don't you know? I don't know. What, you want me to put it in Google Translate? All right. The Pit and the Pendulum. I was sick unto death with that long agony, and when they at length unbound me, and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dread sentence of death, was the last of distinct accentuation which reached my ears. After that, the sound of the inquisitorial voices seemed merged in one dreamy, indeterminate hum. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from its association in fancy with the burr of mill wheel. This only for a brief period, for presently I heard no more. Yet for a while I saw, but with how terrible an exaggeration. I saw the lips of the black-robed judges. They appeared to me white, whiter than the sheet upon which I traced these words, and thin even to grotesqueness, thin with the intensity of their expression of firmness, of immovable resolution, of stern contempt of human torture. I saw that the decrees of what to me was fate were still issuing from those lips. I saw them writhe with a deadly locution. I saw them fashion the syllables of my name, and I shuddered because no sound succeeded. I saw, too, for the moment of delirious horror, the soft and nearly imperceptible waving of the sable draperies which enwrapped the walls of the apartment, And then my vision fell upon the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first they wore the aspect of charity, and seemed white and slender angels who would save me. But then, all at once, there came a most deadly nausea over my spirit, and I felt every fiber in my frame thrill as if I had touched the wire of a galvanic battery, while the angel forms became meaningless specters with heads of flame, and I saw that from them there would be no help. And then there stole to my fancy, like a rich musical note, the thought of what sweet rest there must be in the grave. The thought came gently and stealthily, and it seemed long before it attained full appreciation. But just as my spirit came at length properly to feel and entertain it, the figures of the judges vanished, as if magically from before me. The tall candles sank into nothingness. Their flames went out utterly. The blackness of darkness supervened all sensations, appeared swallowed up in a mad rushing descent as of the soul into Hades. Then silence and stillness and night were the universe. I had swooned, but still will not say that all of consciousness was lost. What of it there remained I will not attempt to define, or even to describe. Yet all was not lost. In the deepest slumber, no. In delirium, no. In swoon, no. In death, no. Even in the grave, all is not lost. Else there is no immortality for man. Arousing from the most profound of slumbers, we break the gossamer web of some dream. Yet in the second afterwards, so frail may that web have been, we remembered not that we have dreamed. In the return to life from the swoon, there were 2 stages. First, that of the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that of the sense of physical existence. It seemed probable that if, upon reaching the second stage, we could recall the impressions of the first, we should find these impressions eloquent in memories of the gulf beyond. And what gulf is? What? At least shall we distinguish its shadows from those of the tomb. But if the impressions of what I have termed the first stage are not at will recalled, yet, after long interval, do they not come unbidden? While we marvel whence they come, he who has never swooned is not he who finds strange palaces and wildly familiar faces in coals that glow, is not he who beholds floating in mid-air the sad visions that the many may not view, is not he who ponders over the perfume of some novel flower, is not he whose brain grows bewildered with the meaning of some musical cadence which has never before arrested his attention. Amid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amid earnest struggles to regather some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul had lapsed, there have been moments where I have dreamed of success. There have been brief, very brief periods when I have conjured up remembrances which the lucid reason of latter epoch assures me could have had reference only to that condition of seeming unconsciousness. The shadows of memory tell indistinctly of tall figures that lifted and bore me in silence down, down, still down, till a hideous dizziness oppressed me at the mere idea of the interminableness of the descent. They tell also of a vague horror at my heart, on account of that heart's unnatural stillness. Then comes a sense of sudden motionlessness throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a ghastly train, had outrun in their descent the limits of the limitless, and paused from the wearisomeness of their toil. After this I call to mind flatness and dampness, and then all is madness, the madness of a memory which busies itself among forbidden things. Very suddenly there came back to my soul motion and sound, the tumultuous motion of the heart, and, in my ears, the sound of its beating. Then a pause in which all is blank. Then again sound, and motion, and touch, a tingling sensation pervading my frame. Then the mere consciousness of existence, without thought, a condition which lasted long. Then, very suddenly, thought, and shuddering terror, and earnest endeavor to comprehend my true state. Then a strong desire to lapse into insensibility, then a rushing revival of soul, and a successful effort to move, and now a full memory of the trial, of the judges, of the sable draperies, of the sentence, of the sickness, of the swoon. The entire forgetfulness of all that followed, and all that a latter day and much earnestness of endeavor have enabled me vaguely to recall. So far, I had not opened my eyes. I felt that I lay upon my back, unbound. I reached out my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. There I suffered it to remain for many minutes, while I strove to imagine where and what I could be. I longed, yet dared not to employ my vision. I dreaded the first glance at objects around me. It was not that I feared to look upon things horrible, but I grew aghast lest there should be nothing to see. At length, with a wild desperation at heart, I quickly unclosed my eyes. My worst thoughts then were confirmed. The blackness of eternal night encompassed me. I struggled for breath. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me. The atmosphere was intolerably close. I still lay quietly, and made effort to exercise my reason. I brought to mind the inquisitorial proceedings, and attempted from that point to deduce my real condition. The sentence had passed, and it appeared to me that a very long interval of time had since elapsed. Yet not for a moment did I suppose myself actually dead. Such a supposition, notwithstanding what we read in fiction, is altogether inconsistent with real existence. But where and in what state was I? The condemned to death, I knew, perished usually at the auto da face, and one of these had been held on the very night of the day of my trial. Had I been remanded to my dungeon to await the next sacrifice, which would not take place for many months? This I at once saw could not be. Victims had been in immediate demand. Moreover, my dungeon, as well as the condemned cells at Toledo, had stone floors, and light was not altogether excluded. A fearful idea now suddenly drove the blood in torrents upon my heart, and for a brief period I once more relapsed into insensibility. Upon recovering, I at once started to my feet, trembling convulsively in every fiber. Upon recovering, I at once started up. I thrust my arms wildly above and around me in all directions. I felt nothing, yet dreaded to move a step, lest I should be impeded by the walls of a tomb. Perspiration burst from every pore and stood in cold big beads upon my forehead. The agony of suspense grew at length intolerable, and I cautiously moved forward, with my arms extended and my eyes straining from their sockets, in the hope of catching some faint ray of light. I proceeded for many paces, but still all was blackness and vacancy. I breathed more freely. It seemed evident that mine was not, at least, the most hideous of fates. And now, as I still continued to step cautiously onward, there came thronging upon my recollection 1,000 vague rumors of the horrors of Toledo. Of the dungeons there had been strange things narrated. Fables I had always deemed them, and yet strange and too ghastly to repeat, save in a whisper. Was I left to perish of starvation in this subterranean world of darkness? Or what fate perhaps even more fearful awaited me? That the result would be death, and a death of more than customary bitterness, I knew too well the character of my judges to doubt. The mode and the hour were all that occupied or distracted me. My outstretched hands at length encountered some solid obstruction. It was a wall, seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping with all the careful distrust with which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however, afforded me no means of ascertaining the dimensions of my dungeon, as I might make its circuit, and return to the point whence I set out, without being aware of that fact. So perfectly uniform seemed the wall, I therefore sought the knife which had been in my pocket, which led into the inquisitorial chamber, but it was gone. My clothes had been exchanged for a wrapper of coarse serge. I had thought of forcing the blade in some miniature crevice of the masonry, so as to identify my point of departure. The difficulty, nevertheless, was but trivial, although, in the disorder of my fancy, it seemed at first insuperable. I tore a piece of the hem of the robe and placed the fragment at full length and at right angles to the wall. In groping my way around the prison, I could not fail to encounter this rag upon completing the circuit. So at last, I thought, but I had not encountered upon the extent of the dungeon, or upon my own weakness. The ground was moist and slippery. I staggered onward for some time, when I stumbled and fell. My excessive fatigue induced me to remain prostrate, and sleep soon overtook me as I lay. Upon awaking and stretching forth an arm, I found beside me a loaf and a pitcher with water. I was too much exhausted to reflect upon this circumstance, but ate and drank with avidity. Shortly afterward, I resumed my tour around the prison, and with much toil came at last upon the fragment of the serge. Up to the period when I fell, and I had counted 52 paces, and upon resuming my walk, I had counted 48 more, when I arrived at the rag. And there were in all then 100 paces, and admitting 2 pieces to the yard, I presumed the dungeon to be 50 yards in circuit. I admit, however, with many angles in the wall, and thus I could form no guess at the shape of the vault. For vault I could not help supposing it to be. I had little object, certainly no hope, in these researches, but a vague curiosity prompted me to continue them. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure. At first, I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, although seemingly of solid material, was treacherous with slime. At length, however, I took courage and did not hesitate to step firmly, endeavoring to cross in as direct a line as possible. I had advanced some 10 or 12 paces in this manner, when the remnant of the torn hem of my robe became entangled between my legs. I stepped on it and fell violently on my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a somewhat startling circumstance, which yet, in a few seconds afterward, and while I still lay prostrate, arrested my attention. It was this. My chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips and the upper portion of my head, although seemingly at a less elevation than the chin, touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemingly bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of a decayed fungus arose to my nostrils. I put forward my arm, and shuddered to find that I had fallen at the very brink of a circular pit, whose extent, of course, I had no means of ascertaining at the moment. Groping around the masonry just below the margin, I succumbed in dislodging a small fragment and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I hearkened to its reverberations as it dashed against the sides of the chasm in its descent. At length there was a sullen plunge into water, succeeded by loud echoes. At the same moment there came a sound resembling the quick opening and as rapid closing of a door overhead, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom and as suddenly faded away. I saw clearly the doom which had been prepared for me, and congratulated myself upon the timely accident by which I had escaped. Another step before my fall, and the world had seen me no more, and the death just avoided was of that very character which I had regarded as fabulous and frivolous in the tales respecting the Inquisition. To the victims of its tyranny there was a choice of death which, with its direct physical agonies, or death with its most hideous moral horrors. I had been reserved for the latter. By long suffering, my nerves had been unstrung, until I trembled at the sound of my own voice, and had become in every respect a fitting subject for the species of torture that awaited me. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall, resolving there to perish rather than risk the terrors of the wells, of which my imagination now pictured many in the various positions about the dungeon. In other conditions of mind, I might have courage to end my misery at once, by a plunge into one of these abysses, but now I was the veriest of cowards. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. Agitation of spirit kept me awake for many long hours, but at length I again slumbered. Upon rousing, I found by my side, as before, a loaf and a pitcher of water. A burning thirst consumed me, and I emptied the vessel at a draught. It must have been drugged, for scarcely had I drunk before I became irresistibly drowsy. A deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. How long it lasted, of course, I know not. But when, once again, I unclosed my eyes, the objects around me were visible, by a wild sulphurous luster, the origin of which I could not at first determine. I was enabled to see the extent and aspect of the prison. In its size I had been greatly mistaken. The whole circuit of its walls did not exceed 25 yards. For some minutes this fact occasioned me a world of vain trouble. Vain indeed, for what could be of less importance under terrible circumstances which environed me, than the mere dimensions of my dungeon? But my soul took a wild interest in trifles, and I busied myself in endeavors to account for the error I had committed in my measurement. The truth at length flashed upon me. In my first attempt at exploration, I had counted 52 paces. Up to the period when I fell, I must have been within a pace or two of the fragment of the surge. In fact, I had nearly performed a circuit of the vault. I then slept, and upon awakening, I must have returned upon my steps, thus supposing the circuit nearly double than it actually was. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I began my tour with a wall to the left, and ended it with a wall to the right. I had been deceived, too, in respect to the shape of the enclosure. In feeling my way, I had found many angles, and thus deduced an idea of great irregularity. So potent is the effect of total darkness upon one arousing from lethargy or sleep. The angles were simply those of a few slight depressions or niches at odd intervals. The general shape of the prison was square. What I had taken for masonry seemed now to be iron or some other metal in huge plates, whose sutures or joints occasioned the depression. The entire surface of this metallic enclosure was rudely daubed in all the hideous and repulsive devices to which the charnel superstition of the monks had given rise. The figures of fiends and aspects of menace, with skeleton forms, and other more really fearful images, overspread and disfigured the walls. I observed that the outlines of these monstrosities were sufficiently distinct, but that the color seemed faded and blurred, as if from the effects of a damp atmosphere. I now noticed the floor, too, which was of stone. In the center yawned the circular pit from whose jaws I had escaped, but it was the only one in the dungeon. All this I saw indistinctly and by much effort, for my personal condition had been greatly changed during slumber. I now lay upon my back, and at full length, on the species of low framework of wood. To this I was securely bound by a long strap resembling a surcingle. It passed in many convulsions about my limbs and body, leaving at liberty only my head and my left arm to such extent that I could, by dint of much exertion, supply myself with food from an earthen dish which lay by my side on the floor. I saw to my horror that the pitcher had been removed. I say to my horror, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. This thirst it appeared to be the design of my persecutors to stimulate, for the food in the dish was meat pungently seasoned. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet overhead, and constructed much as the side walls, and one of its panels, a very singular figure, riveted my whole attention. It was the painted figure of Time as he commonly represented, save that in lieu of a scythe, he held what, at a casual glance, I supposed to be a picture image of a huge pendulum, such as we see on antique clocks. There was something, however, in the appearance of this machine which caused me to regard it more attentively. While I gazed directly upward at it, for its position was immediately over my own, I fancied that I saw in it motion. In an instant afterward, the fancy was confirmed. Its sweep was brief, and of course slow. I watched it for some minutes, somewhat in fear, but more in wonder. Wearied at length with observing its dull movement, I turned my eyes upon the other objects in the cell. A slight noise attracted my notice, and, looking to the floor, I saw several enormous rats traversing it. They had issued from the well, which lay just within view to my right. Even then, while I gazed, they came up in troops, hurriedly, with ravenous eyes, allured by the scent of the meat. From this it required much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time, before again I cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased in extent by nearly a yard. As a natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was the idea that it had perceptibly descended. I now observed, with what horror it is needless to say, that its nether extremity was formed of a crescent of glittering steel, about a foot in length from horn to horn, the horns upward, and the under edge evidently as keen as that of a razor. Like a razor also it seemed massy and heavy, tapering from the edge into a solid and broad structure above. It was appended to a weighty rod of brass, and the whole hissed as it swung through the air. I could no longer doubt the doom prepared for me by monkish ingenuity in torture. My cognizance of the pit had become known to the inquisitorial agents. The pit, whose horrors had been destined for so bold a recusant as myself, the pit typical of hell, and regarded by rumor as the ultima thule of all their punishments. The plunge into this pit I had avoided by the merest of accidents. I knew that surprise or entrapment in torment formed an important portion of all the grotesquerie of the dungeon deaths. Having failed to fall, it was no part of the demon plan to hurl me into the abyss, and thus, there being no alternative, a different and a milder destruction awaited me. Milder! I half smiled in my agony as I thought of such application of such a term. What boots it to tell of the long, long hours of horror more than mortal, during which I counted the rushing oscillations of the steel, inch by inch, line by line, with a descent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages, down and still down it came. Days passed, it might have been that many days passed, ere it swept so closely over me as to fan me with its acrid breath. The odor of the sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. I prayed, I wearied heaven with my prayer for its more speedy descent. I grew frantically mad, and struggled to force myself upward against the sweep of the fearful scimitar. And then I fell suddenly calm, and lay smiling at the glittering death, as a child at some rare bauble. There was another interval of utter insensibility. It was brief, for upon again lapsing into life, there had been no perceptible descent of the pendulum. But it might have been long, for I knew there were demons who took note of my swoon, and who could have arrested the vibration at pleasure. Upon my recovery, too, I felt very, Oh, inexpressibly sick and weak, as if through some long inanition. Even amid the agonies of that period, the human nature craved food. With painful effort, I outstretched my left arm as far as my bonds permitted, and took possession of the small remnant which had been spared me by the rats. As I put a portion of it within my lips, there rushed to my mind a half-formed thought of joy, of hope. Yet what business had I with hope? It was, as I say, a half-formed thought. Man as many such, which are never completed. I felt that it was of joy, of hope, but felt also that it had perished in its formation. In vain I struggled to perfect, to regain it. Long suffering had nearly annihilated all my ordinary powers of mind. I was an imbecile, an idiot. The vibration of the pendulum was at right angles to my length. I saw that the crescent was designed to cross the region of the heart. It would fray the serge of my robe. It would return and repeat its operations again and again. Notwithstanding its terribly wide sweep, some 30 feet or more, and the hissing vigor of its descent, sufficient to sunder these very walls of iron, still the fraying of my robe would be all that, for several minutes, it would accomplish. And at this thought I paused. I dared not go farther than this reflection. I dwelt upon it with a pertinacity of attention, as if in so dwelling I could arrest here the descent of the steel. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of the crescent as it should pass across the garment, upon the peculiar thrilling sensation which the friction of cloth produces on the nerves. I pondered upon all this frivolity until my teeth were on edge. Down, steadily down it crept. I took a frenzied pleasure in contrasting its downward with its lateral velocity. To the right, to the left, far and wide, with the shriek of the damned spirit, to my heart, with the stealthy pace of the tiger. I alternately laughed and howled as the one or the other idea grew predominant. Down. Hold on. Down, certainly, relentlessly down. It vibrated within 3 inches of my bosom. I struggled violently, furiously to free my left arm. This was free only from the elbow to the hand. I could reach the latter, from the platter beside me to my mouth with great effort, but no farther. Could I have broken the fastenings above the elbow, I would have seized and attempted to arrest the pendulum. I might as well have attempted to arrest an avalanche. Down. Still unceasingly, still inevitably down. I gasped and struggled at each vibration. I shrunk convulsively at its every sweep. My eyes followed it outward or upwards, whirls with eagerness of the most unmeaning despair. They closed themselves spasmodically at the descent, although death would have been a relief. Oh, how unspeakable! Still, I quivered in every nerve to think how slight a sinking of the machinery would precipitate that keen, glistening axe upon my bosom. It was hope that prompted the nerve to quiver, the frame to shrink. It was hope, the hope that triumphs on the rack, the whispers to the death-condemned even in the dungeons of the Inquisition. I saw some 10 or 12 vibrations would bring the steel in actual contact with my robe. And with this observation, there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen, collected calmness of despair. For the first time during many hours, or perhaps days, I thought. It now occurred to me that the bandage or surgical which enveloped me was unique. It now occurred to me I was tried by no separate cord. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent athwarted any portion of the band, would so detach it that it might be unwound from my person by means of my left hand. But how fearful in that case the proximity of the steel! The result of the slightest struggle, how deadly! Was it likely, moreover, that the minions of the torturer had not foreseen and provided for this possibility? Was it probable that the bandage crossed my bosom in the track of the pendulum? dreading to find my faint, and as it seemed in last hope frustrated, I so far elevated my head to obtain a distinct view of my breast. There surgical enveloped my limbs and body, closed in all directions, save in the path of the destroying crescent. Scarcely had I dropped my head back into its original position, when there flashed upon my mind what I cannot better describe than as the uniformed half of that idea of deliverance to which I had previously alluded, and of which a moiety only floated indeterminately through my brain. Sorry. When I raised food to my burning lips, the whole thought was now present, feeble, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. I proceeded at once, with the nervous energy of despair, to attempt its execution. For many hours, the immediate vicinity of the low framework upon which I lay had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as they waited but for motionlessness on my part to make me their prey. To what food, I thought, have they been accustomed in the well? They had devoured, in spite of all my efforts to prevent them, all but a small remnant of the contents of the dish. I had fallen into an habitual seesaw or wave of the hand about the platter, and at length the unconscious uniformity of the movement deprived it of effect. In their voracity, the vermin frequently fastened their sharp fangs in my fingers, but the particulars of the oil and spicy viand which now remained, I thoroughly rubbed the bandage wherever I could reach it. Then, raising my hand from the floor, I lay breathlessly still. At first, the ravenous animals were startled and terrified at the change, at the cessation of movement. They shrank alarmedly back. Many sought the well, but this was only for a moment. I had not counted in vain upon their voracity. Observing that I remained without motion, one or two of the boldest leapt upon the framework and smelt the surcingle. This seemed the signal for a general rush. Forth from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood, they overran it, and leaped in hundreds upon my person. The measured movement of the pendulum disturbed them not at all. Avoiding its strokes, they busied themselves with the anointed bandage. They pressed, they swarmed upon me in the ever-accumulating heaps. They writhed upon my throat, their cold lips sought my own. I was half stifled by their thronging pressure, disgusted, for which the world has no name, swelled my bosom, and chilled with heavy clamminess my heart. Yet 1 minute, and I felt that the struggle would be over. Plainly, I perceived the loosening of the bandage. I knew that in more than one place it must be already dissevered. With a more than human resolution, I lay still. Nor had I erred in my calculations, nor had I endured in vain. At length felt that I was free. The surcingle hung in ribbons from my body, but the stroke of the pendulum already pressed upon my bosom. It had divided the serge of the robe. It had cut through the linen beneath. Twice again it swung, and a sharp sense of pain shot through every nerve. But the moment of escape had arrived. At a wave of my hand, my deliverers hurried tumultuously away. With a steady movement, cautious, sidelong, shrinking and slow, I slid from the embrace of the bandage and beyond the reach of the scimitar. For the moment, at least, I was free. Free! And in the grasp of the Inquisition, I had scarcely stepped from my wooden bed of horror upon the stone floor of the prison when the motion of the hellish machine ceased, and I beheld it drawn up, by some invisible force, through the ceiling. This was a lesson which I took desperately to heart. My every motion was undoubtedly watched. Free! I had but escaped death in one form of agony, and to be delivered unto worse than death in some other. With that thought, I rolled my eyes nervously around on the barriers of iron that hemmed me in. Something unusual, some change which, at first, I could not appreciate distinctly. It was obvious, had taken place in the apartment. For many minutes of a dreamy and trembling abstraction, I busied myself in vain, unconnected conjecture. During this period, I became aware for the first time of the origin of the sulphurous light which illuminated the cell. It proceeded from a fissure, about half an inch in width, extending entirely around the prison at the base of the walls, which thus appeared and were completely separated from the floor. I endeavored, but of course in vain, to look at the aperture. As I arose from the attempt, the mystery of the alteration in the chamber broke at once upon my understanding. I have observed that, although the outlines of the figures upon the wall were sufficiently distinct, yet the colors seemed blurred and indefinite. These colors had now assumed, and were momentarily assuming, a startling and most intense brilliancy, that gave to the spectral and fiendish portraitures an aspect that might have thrilled even firmer nerves than my own. Demon eyes of a wild and ghastly vivacity glared upon me in 1,000 directions where none had been visible before, and gleamed with the lurid luster of a fire that I could not force my imagination to regard as unreal. Unreal! Even while I breathed, there came to my nostrils the breath of the vapor of heated iron. A suffocating odor pervaded the prison. A deeper glow settled each moment in the eyes that glared at my agonies. A richer tint of crimson diffused itself over the pictures of horrors of blood. I panted. I gasped for breath. There could be no doubt of the design of my tormentors. Oh, most unrelenting! Oh, most demoniac of men! I shrank from the glowing metal to the center of the cell. Amid the thought of the fiery destruction that impended, the idea of the coolness of the well came over my soul like balm. I rushed to its deadly brink. I threw my straining vision below. The glare from the enkindled roof illuminated its inmost recess. Yet, for a wild moment, did my spirit refuse to comprehend the meaning of what I saw. At length it wrestled its way into my soul. It burned itself upon my shuddering reason. Oh, for a voice to speak! Oh, horror! Oh, any horror but this! With a shriek, I rushed from the margin and buried my face in my hands, weeping bitterly. The heat rapidly increased, and once again I looked up, shuddering with a fit of the ague. There had been a second change in the cell, and now the change was obvious in the form. As before, it was in vain that I at first endeavored to appreciate or understand what was taking place, but not long was I left in doubt. The inquisitorial vengeance had been hurried by my twofold escape, and there was to be no more dallying with the king of terrors. The room had been square. I saw that 2 of its iron angles were now acute, 2, consequently, obtuse. The fearful difference quickly increased with a low rumbling or moaning sound. In an instant the apartment had shifted its form into that of a lozenge. But the alteration stopped not here, for I neither hoped nor desired it to stop. I could have clasped at the red walls to my bosom as a garment of eternal peace. Death, I said, any death but that of the pit. Fool, might I not have known that into the pit it was the object of the burning iron to urge me? Could I resist its glow? Or if even that, could I withstand its pressure? And now, flatter and flatter grew the lozenge, with a rapidity that left me no time to contemplation. Its center, and of course its greatest width, came just over the yawning gulf. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me resistlessly onward. At length, for my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. I felt that I tottered upon the brink. I averted my eyes. There was a discordant hum of human voices. There was a loud blast as of many trumpets. There was a harsh grating as of 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own as I fell, fainting into the abyss. It was that of General Lasalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies. The end. The end. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Ugh. Oh my gosh. Oh. There we go. Oh my gosh. Wow. Just wow. They had hoped he fell into the pit in the darkness, but he escaped through luck. And then they were gonna chop him in half with the pendulum, but he managed to escape. And then they set the walls aflame, and the walls started shrinking and pushing him closer and closer into the pit. And then in the final moment, just before actually I think the guy was actually about to fall in. That was when he was saved. He was saved by the French. Saved by a French general who reached out and grabbed him before he fell into the pit. My gosh. My gosh. Alright. Well, that was the pit and the pendulum. The pit and the pendulum. Wow, what's that time already? You know, I was hoping to read The Telltale Heart, but based on time, we might only be able to... Well, let's see. We'll see. We'll see. Sorry, Mr. Poe, but I have the word reading upon your forehead. Cask of Amontillado. That one's only like 6 pages. Telltale Heart, how long are you? Telltale Heart ain't that long. Typical Orison. Telltale Heart's only 4 pages, so yeah, I could probably read that. I could probably fit that in. I thought it was going to be a long one. The Cask of Amontillado is... Alright, everybody turn your books to page 733. We're going to be reading The Cask of Amontillado. I remember this one distinctly. I read this one during my senior year in high school. 733. We got this. 733. The Domain of Arnium. Oh, we passed it. Oh, no. We didn't go far enough. We didn't go far. There we go. There we go. Found it. Page 733. Yes, Miss Blue. Will this be on the test? Of course it's going to be on the test. Have you guys begun your 5-page essay on the meaning of about the themes and the meaning of the Raven? You do know this is going to be due in about 9 hours. If I don't have an email of your 5-page essay talking about the themes and the meaning of the Raven and send in 9 hours, you guys are gonna fail class. I'm gonna fail you. And then what are you gonna do when your college debt comes up? Nah, this will be fine. You'll be fine. My gremlin ate my homework. I'm used to dogs eating homework. Now gremlins are eating homework, are they? The Cask of Amontillado. It's not very long. Oh boy, are we ready? Are we ready? The Cask of Amontillado. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length, I would be avenged. This was a point of definitively This was a point definitively settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who was done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity, to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and brought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk, one evening during a supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting partistriped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his head. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible! And in the middle of the carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price, without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." "Amontillado?" "I have my doubts." "Amontillado!" "And I must satisfy them." "Amontillado!" "As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchesi. If anyone has critical turn, it is he. He will tell me." "Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry." "And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own." "Come, let's go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "My friend, no. I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement." "Lucchesi, I have no engagements. Come." What is an Amontillado? What is an Amontillado? What is an Amontillado? We shall look that up. Go. Amontillado. Amontillado is a wine. A medium dry sherry. Amontillado is a variety of sherry wine characterized by being darker than fino sherry, but lighter than oloroso sherry. Amontillado wine is named after Montilla municipality in Andalusia, Spain, where the style of sherry originated in the 18th century. Commercially, the name Amontillado is used as a measure of color to label any style of sherry that lay between the categories of fino and oloroso. In American literature, Amontillado sherry also features in the title of the short story, The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. An Amontillado sherry begins as a fino, which is fortified to approximately 15.5% alcohol with a cap of floor yeast, limiting its exposure to the air. A cask of fino is considered to be an Amontillado if the layer of floor fails to develop adequately, is intentionally killed by additional fortification, or is allowed to die off through non-replenishment. Without the layer floor, Amontillado must be fortified to approximately 17.5% alcohol so that it does not oxidize too quickly. After the additional fortification, Amontillado oxidizes slowly, exposed to oxygen through the slightly porous American or Canadian oak cask, and gains a darker color and richer flavor than Fino. Amontillado is characterized by nutty aromas, tobacco, aromatic herbs, and often sturdy, polished notes of oak. The fusion of two different aging processes gives Amontillado wines a special flavor. Courtesy of Wikipedia. I see. I too will be easily learn if offered booze. Yes, it's a very illustrious and amazing wine, apparently. Don't do it, though. You might end up victimized. You might end up the victim of revenge. Hold on. Well, I'm out of water. I was going to start reading, but my throat is being all pertingly. Come forth, pepper of doctorness. The doctorate. I am being visited by the doctorate of peppers. This is no Amontillado, but it will suffice. Delicious. Delicious. I have no engagements come. My friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado! You have been imposed upon. And as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado. Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm. Putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry to my palazzo. Noted, gremlin can be lured with either doctors or pepper. There were no attendants at home. They had been absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together on the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe," said he. "It is farther on," said I. "But observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with 2 flimsy orbs that distilled the rum of intoxication. "Nitre?" he asked at length. "Nitre," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said with decision. "We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchesi." "Enough," he said. "The cough is mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough." "True, true," I replied. "And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily. But you should use all proper caution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps." Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle, which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. "Drink," I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to its lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarity, while his bells jingled. "I drink," he said, "to the buried that repose around us, and I to your long life." He again took my arm, and we proceeded. "These vaults," he said, "are extensive." "The Montresors," I replied, "were a great and numerous family." "I forget your arms." "A huge human foot d'or, in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel." "And the motto?" "Nemo me impune lacessit." "Good," he said. What does that mean? What does that mean? Nemo me impune lacessit. Google. French to English. What does this mean? Nemo me impune lacessit. Oh, it's Latin. "No one has troubled me with impunity." No one has troubled me with impunity. I understand now. I understand now. Oh, oh. Yes. 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 No wonder. The wine sparkled in his eyes and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. We had passed through walls of piled bones, and with casks and puncheons intermingling, into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made a bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. Fancy word. Don't fuck with me. "The nitre!" I said. "See, it increases. It hangs like a moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it's too late. You'll cough." "It is nothing," he said. "Let us go on. But first, another draught of the Medoc." I broke and reached him a flaçon of de Grève. He emptied it at breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. "You do not comprehend?" he said. "Not I," I replied. "Then you are not of the Brotherhood." "How?" "You are not of the Masons." "Yes, yes," I said. "Yes, yes." "You? Impossible. A Mason?" "A Mason?" I replied. "A sign," he said. "It is this," I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds. Wait. Okay, I didn't skip anything. I was like, wait a minute. It is this," I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire. "You jest," he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. "But let us proceed to the Amontillado." "Be it so," I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak, and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descended again, arrived at a deep crypt, in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeaux rather to glow than flame. At the remote end of the crypt there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this fashion. In this manner. From the 4th, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely an interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of the circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depths of the recess. Its termination the feeble light did not enable us to see. "Proceed," I said. "Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucchesi—" "He is an ignoramus," interrupted my friend as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more and I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet. Horizontally, from one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, "over the wall. You cannot help feel the knitter. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power." The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied, "the Amontillado." As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I scarcely laid the first tier of my masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was a long, obstinate silence. I laid the 2nd tier, and the 3rd, and the 4th, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without any interruption the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. The succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs, and felt satisfied. I reproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored, and I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th and the 9th and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position. But now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "A very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Over our wine." "The Amontillado," I said. "Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said. "Let us be gone." "For the love of God, Montresor!" "Yes," I said, "for the love of God." But to these words I hearkened, in a vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato!" No answer. I called again, "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick, on account of the dampness of the catacombs. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat. The end. Remember, I suffer no impunity. Not gonna lie, I think Fortunato is cooked. Oh yeah, you know. Remember, do not fuck with a Montresor, 'cause they will get their vengeance in this life or the next. I shall have my vengeance in this life or the next. Nemo me impune lasciate. Perhaps I should make that my new, that'll be my new motto. Hey guys, what's the Gremlins motto? Nemo me impune la cassettes. Fuck, don't mess with the gremlin. Oh boy. Oh boy. Oh man, I gotta flex my arm. That was a shorter one, but my goodness gracious. Holding this book up, as I said, this is like over 1,000-page book. Over 1,000 pages. We're not even talking about the thick cover. Lord Borkington. Lord Borkington! Awoo! Awoo! Whoa, 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 whoa! Such thickness, such greatness. Alright. That was a Cask of Amontillado. And now we will go a portion. Moving on down to our final story here. Hold on. Mark it. Bookmark. There we go. Sometimes OBS wants to keep things in a little doohickeys. It's heavy with with angst and dread. It's like, hello, you thought if I used if you thought the knife you thought the knife was bad. You think the chainsaw was bad. Wait until I get you. Wait until you meet my complete tales and poems of Edgar Allan Poe book, and I blonk you over the head with it. Telltale Heart, page 498. 498. It's another short one. This one's even shorter than the Cask of Amontillado. Delicious. Thank goodness nobody linked Cask of Amontillado with my performance in Date Everything. When I was talking to that one guy, the food man. The Telltale Heart. You know, my first... I'll be honest with you guys. 100%. I never read this story. My experience with the Telltale Heart... For those of you who are culturally enriched and are aware of The Simpsons... The Simpsons... There was an episode where Lisa was working on a project, and her project was the Telltale Heart. She made a mock-up of the room and a thumping and all that jazz. And... that was my sole experience with the Telltale Heart. I've never read this short story before, so this will be my first time. But I am familiar enough with it because of that episode, and just culture in general. So here we go. The Telltale Heart. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eyes. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture. A pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights. Every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber, and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than mine did. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened, through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on, steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still, and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no! It was a low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it was welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket which had made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the imperceivable shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones, but I could not see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon that damned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. And even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I heard the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him, and then I smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with the muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took from the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber, and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? Then there entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night, suspicious of foul play, had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentlemen welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasure, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat, and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited by fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no. They heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypothetical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains! I shriek, dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks here. Here it is, the beating of his hideous heart. And that's it. The end. Oh, and that is the end of the Telltale Heart. Oh, oh, ah. Hello, unknown. Welcome in. How's it going? Cracked under zero pressure. Indeed. Indeed. He thought himself so smart and clever. Oh, I done did a good job. I done did good job. I done did good. I done did good. No one suspects. Nobody suspects a thing. Octodad. Nobody suspects a thing. Octodad. Mana 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 moo. Yeah. Alright. Alright. Well, well, well. Well, well, well. So the moral of the story, don't have fucked up eyes. Or maybe the moral of the story is to have fucked up eyes if somebody's plotting your murder. I don't know. Was it really the eye? Or was it the man who feared the eye? The ever-watchful eye? Alright. Hello, everybody. We're over here now. Because it has been but 3 hours, I have read the poems and the stories that I so did want to meet. And yeah, my voice, I am feeling it right here in my throat, that perhaps if I were to continue onward, I might regret it. And I don't want to have to take like a super long break in favor of that, so I will be ending it here. I hope you all enjoyed the readings of The Raven, The Fall of the House of Usher, The Pit and the Pendulum, The Cask of Amontillado, and The Telltale Heart. I hope you enjoyed the readings. Yay! I also did the bells. The bells, the bells, the bells, the bells. Awesomeness. Alright, everybody. Happy Halloween! Happy Halloween to all of you! Yay! And before I do my departure, I would like to throw down another reminder that my friend, I Am a Disaster, is doing a they're doing a debut of their new appearance, their new model, their remake, in about 45 minutes over on their Twitch. I Am a Disaster. I will be going over there to enjoy the spectacle and the charades for the day. So yeah, if you want to help support one of my friends, feel free to do so. Otherwise, you have no obligations. You have no obligations. But yeah, for today, I have finished. I hope you enjoyed the stories and poems of Edgar Allan Poe that I have read. So yeah, happy Halloween. Enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And thank you all very much for watching. Thank you for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed the stream. Enjoy the rest of your day. And until next time, ciao for now. Ciao for now. Bye.